Hello, my name is Fladio Salmon Mwijage from Edukea Tanzania. I'm a history teacher of advanced level. We are proceeding with our topic, which is the rise of capitalism in Europe. So welcome in this another session to continue with the contributions of Black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America. The contribution of Black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America. Before looking at that, let me preview on the last session. On the last session, we saw the condition that made European Americans to capture African slaves to America and Caribbean. We saw them. So now we are going to see the contributions of Black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America. The first contribution was slaves provided cheap labor in plantations and mines. As we know that during the mercantile period, those cheap labor were used as a source of labor in plantations and mines. In which sense, those people were saving or were used to produce various raw materials and food crops. And those raw materials were used to produce various manufactured goods in industries. So you can see how these cheap labor or the Black Africans contributed to or provided labor in plantations and mines. For example, in sugar plantations in French colonies, in French colonies, in Portugal colonies, in Spanish colonies, and the British colonies. For example, in New Zealand, Caribbean, Canada, Trinidad, and the other areas. And mines which were established in America by that time, after being discovered by Christopher Columbus. So those were the laws which those slaves were paid. Another contribution of Black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America was they were acted as a source of market. As in the previous lesson, I told you that those Black Africans who were transported or exported from Africa to North America and in Europe were increasing the population of the native area. And hence that population were acted as a source of market in which the products which were produced in the industries were consumed by that increased population by Black Africans. So you can see how that Black Africans contributed to the increase of purchasing power of industrial manufactured goods that were produced in Europe and North America, where industries were located. And another contribution was they participated in the struggle of American independence. As we know, during that era, the Americans were struggled much to ensure that they are returning their lost freedom. So the Americans with their leaders organized and established various strategies on struggling for their independence, which were dominated by the British government. So those Black Africans were joined together with Americans or native people in America to struggle for independence, because even Black Africans were exploited, oppressed by those Europeans in America. So together with Americans fighting or fought the war for gaining their independence. So you can see their contributions. Another contribution of black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America, they engaged in various economic activities. The black Africans were involved themselves in various economic activities. For example, in music industries, film, and sports. So you can see even now there is black Africans in America who are practicing music, films, sports, and games. So you can see through these were activities which were contributed to the government revenue. So you can see, and that revenue were being invested in different economic activities like in the industrial sector, agricultural sector, and mining sector, so as to increase the production and the maximization of profit, hence led to the rise of capitalism in Europe and in North America. Another one is they joined US's army. It means that in other nations there must be army which is responsible for maintaining peace and security within the nation and outside and its borders. So those black Africans were joining the US Army to ensure that the Americans or American government is safe from intruders or invaders. So the army or the USA government were organized and established the strong army by increasing the military personnel from black population. So you can see that military or army were ensured peace and security in America. So the production of raw materials and other economic activities were stable and were free because there was peace and security among of the people. Another of the last contribution of black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and in North America, they led to the high population in towns with cosmopolitan population. It means that they transported black Africans from Africa to America and Europe, where populated the towns with different background. Those populations which were settled in different towns were added a different background. Cosmopolitan means the different nationalities or population from all people from different nationalities, maybe from Nigeria, from Kenya, from Tanzania, from Ghana, and so many. So you can see America are different nationalities or different population of different nationalities, and that population increased the purchasing power of various manufactured goods and acted as a source of labor. In that sense, those towns were grown and acted as the trading centers, hence the rise of capitalism in Europe and in North America. After looking at the contributions of black Africans to the rise of capitalism in Europe and North America, let us see another concept, which is abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. Abolition of Atlantic slave trade. This was an action of putting an end of human beings trading. It means that this was an action that was struggled to put the end of human trafficking. It means they aimed to abolish the slave trade, the trafficking or exporting Africans from their lands to America and Europe. And that abolition of slave trade campaign started in Britain in the year of 1803, where slave trade was outlawed in Britain. But up to this year, 1833, all British colonies or all British territories were stopped using slaves in various production. But in other European nations followed to campaign slave trade or the use of slaves in production. The following nation was France in 1848, where the French government enacted laws to abolish the use of slaves in production. And finally, Brazil was the last nation to abolish slave trade in the world in 1888, where the use of slaves in production, maybe in plantations, industrial sector, were stopped. After looking those concepts about the abolition of Atlantic slave trade, which was conducted within 3 continents, Africa, America, and Europe, let us see the factors for the abolition of slave trade. What were the factors that triggered for the abolition of slave trade? These factors are categorized into 3 categories, and these are crucial area, because in next questions can come the question with specified answers to mention or to explain the economic factors or humanitarian factors for the abolition of slave trade, and these are compulsory questions to appear in the national examination. The first economic factor which led to the abolition of slave trade was Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution, this was the period of industrial changes which were occurred in Europe by that time. For example, in 1715s up to 1815s, the British or Britain was the first country to industrialize in Europe, becoming with different discoveries and inventions of various machines which were used in production of various goods and raw materials. So you can see that the human labor was no longer in need, and the machines were replaced the human labor. So that's why Britain as the first nation to champion, to campaign slave trade. So due to the Industrial Revolution led to European nations to campaign abolition of slave trade. Another economic factor was competition in sugar production. This is production between Britain and France. The competition in sugar production between Britain and France was a crucial factor for the abolition of slave trade, whereby in the sugar production by these 2 countries in Europe, whereby France were using slaves in production with cheap price and selling it as sugar at low price, but Britain was using machines that costed a high price and selling sugar at high price, so it's led the differences in the market. The British sugar is at high price with low quality, but French sugar was at low price with high quality, so it brought the conflict between Britain and France. That's why Britain emerged as the first European nations to campaign abolition of slave trade. Another factor for the abolition of slave trade was the rising price of slaves in West Africa. We have to remember that the slave trade activities in Africa involved local rulers. For example, the ruler of Oyo State, Dahomey, and Benin, and other states in West Africa. Those rulers came to know that trade it is beneficial and had high profit. So after knowing that, they increased the price of slaves. So those European nations who were in business of exporting Africans to their plantations in the industrial areas faced the challenge of rising in price of selling those slaves in West Africa. So they decided to discard the use of human labor instead of using and investment of using machines in production. So that was that case. Another factor for the abolition of slave trade was American War of Independence. The American War of Independence was the struggle for Americans to retain their lost independence from the colonizers, which were Britain. So when it reached in 1776 or 1776, the Americans decided to wage in massive struggle for regaining their independence, and this year America gained the flag independence. So you can see, due to this struggle or war led to the colonizers to lose America, and Britain had no longer in use of human labor because she had lost the important colony, which was increasing the production and maximization of profit. So that led to the preparation of the ground for abolition of slave trade. We are here in another economic factor, which is slave revolts. These were revolts which were organized by the slaves in America, in the American plantations and mining centers, where they decided to revolt against their slave masters, those who were oppressing and exploiting them by paying them low wages. So due to that situation, made the abolition of slave trade to be in momentum. For example, about 400,000 people in modern IT or Haiti was organizing themselves to revolt against the slave masters. So you can see this was the large number of slaves, and they succeeded to revolt, and those slave masters surrendered to make those slaves to be free. These were the economic factors for the abolition of slave trade. Let us jump to another category, which is humanitarian factors. Factor number 6, we are proceeding with the Roman number 6. It is evangelical movement. Evangelical movement were the movements which were founded by the evangelist leaders. For example, For example, there were someone who was called Granile Sharp. Granile Sharp was the founder of movement which established it to campaign slave trade. But there were another someone or another man who were called William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. Those were examples of evangelists or evangelist leaders who led the movement to go against with slave trade. So this movement that was led by those people who have mentioned, so led to the abolition of slave trade because they shown some lessons to slave masters and they decided to free those slaves. Another humanitarian factor was the influence of French Revolution of 1789. French Revolution was among of the revolution that took place in Europe, but the lesson which were shown by that time in French spreaded all over the world, specifically in America. And the Americans got that lesson that all humans are equal and nobody has to dominate other people. So they used the one slogan, means the slogan comprised three words: fraternity, equality, and liberty. Those three words were used by the Americans to campaign abolition of slave trade, to show that all people are equal. And that slogan was used during the French Revolution, so it planted the lesson in the mind of Americans, and it was used to campaign that slave trade. Another humanitarian factor was the influence of philosophers. The European philosophers and American philosophers played a great role in the abolition of slave trade. Those philosophers were pronouncing various philosophies concerning on the rights of human beings. They preached a lot about the equality of human beings. For example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher who came up with various philosophies explaining about the equality of human beings, and he wrote the book that were explaining about the human rights. So you can see how philosophers contributed much in the abolition of slave trade. And the last one, but not least, is the rise of anti-slave movement. Anti-slave movement, that was another factor for the abolition of slave trade. For example, in 1787, Granile Sharp formed the movement with his fellows like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. Those were the people who organized the people to go against the slave trade which were practicing in America and other areas. So you can see how those anti-slave movement leaders played a much role, or a lot of strategies in the ensuring of abolition of slave trade. After looking the factors for the abolition of slave trade, which has been categorized in two categories, economic and humanitarian factors, let us go to the tactics used in abolition of slave trade. So these were the factors that were led to the abolition of slave trade. Which tactics or methods or ways which were employed in the whole process of abolition of slave trade? The first tactics or way, it was enactment of laws and the courts. Those laws were enacted by the government of respective nations in Europe and America and other areas of the world to ensure that all human beings are equal and nobody should dominate other people. So those laws were enforced by various governments to ensure that those all slave traders will be reinforced if they will go against with the laws which have been enacted by the governments. So through that, many slave traders feared to be caught by the government and to be jailed. So the abolition of slave trade proved in a light way, so it succeeded in one way or another. Another tactic or way, it was application of diplomacy and dialogue. The European nations leaders or European government leaders applied diplomacy or peaceful dialogues among themselves on seducing the slave traders on how they can abolish or they can stop to use their fellow human beings in production. So the leaders and the anti-slave movement leaders and the evangelical movement leaders were organized the meetings to discuss peacefully to abolish slave trade. But another way which was used in abolition of slave trade was application of force, like deporting slave masters. Application of force after the failure of peaceful way or peaceful method or diplomacy. The governments and the anti-slave trade leaders decided to use forceful method like deporting slave traders, such as Jaja of Obopo was deported due to the going against with the laws which were enacted. So that slave trader was deported, and by deporting those leaders led to the lesson or spreaded the lesson to other slave traders, and they feared, and consequently they stopped using slaves in production. Another method was through Navy patrol. The Navy patrol, in which way? We have to remember that all slaves were exported from Africa through the sea routes. So you can see that the European nations joined together or decided to organize the patrol which will be done in the sea. So every ship and vessels which were passing in the sea were checked by those army which were making the patrol in the sea to ensure that no any slaves were transported to America and Europe. So through that, and this Navy patrol was mainly organized by Britain as the chief campaigner of slave trade abolition. So you can see how through Navy patrol led to the abolition of slave trade, because many people or slave traders were caught and jailed due to the violation of laws which have been enacted by their governments in stopping using slaves in their production. Another way, it was the use of pressure groups like humanitarian group For example, under William Wilberforce, it means that another tactic which used in abolition of slave trade was the use of pressure group to pressurize those slave traders or slave dealers to stop the trading of human beings as commodities and use them as machines or as tools in production. That was made human beings to be unequal, but human beings all were equal. So those pressure groups, like humanitarian groups, played a vital role in the abolition of slave trade. I have given an example of William Wilberforce, who was the main campaigner of abolition of slave trade, and Thomas Clarkson. We have mentioned almost three. Another or last method which used in abolition of slave trade was through establishment of missionary centers. Those missionary centers which were established ensured that they are preaching people, both those slaves and slave traders, showing and trying to explain the equality which exists between human and human, and no any human being must use his or a fellow human being in private gains, especially in production, in plantation. You can't use human being to produce for yourself and nothing to pay to him or her. So through these missionary centers and the missionary leaders were played a role in ensuring slave trade was abolished, and those missionary centers based on religious matters. Specifically, those missionary centers were based on Christianity matters. So they used the Bibles to preach people on how to be humble, how to be patient, on valuing other fellow human beings, and such kind of things. So you can see these were the tactics which were used in the abolition of slave trade. There is a question here, or an exercise, which must be tackled. Question number 1, it states that with a clear explanation, explain the role of black Africans to the rise of capitalism. The second question is assess the factors for the abolition of slave trade. These are possible questions in NECTA. So thank you for watching me. Welcome in another session. I'm Friday from Edukea Tanzania. Thank you.